Tell me, what's the creepiest experience you ever had in your life and why you still think about that moment?
All right, the creepiest thing that ever happened to me, I would say this was about what, Max? 10 years ago? 10 years ago? It was about 9 or 10 years ago. I was living in Walla Walla at the time. So I had woke up that morning very early and I went to work. I would say it was about 4:30, 5 in the morning. And I had to go get gas. So I drove a couple blocks to the gas station and I pull in. It was raining really hard that day, really hard. I get out, I start pumping gas, and suddenly behind me, I had a weird feeling like somebody was watching me. Have you ever had that feeling?
Yeah.
Just something was telling me somebody was watching me. So I turn around, and right across the street on the corner, there's a young girl standing there, and she's got like a grocery bag, like she was going to work, but she kept her lunch in a grocery bag, and she's just standing there staring at me. So I don't pay much attention to her. Like I said, it's pouring rain. She's standing in the rain in the corner. I turn back around. I'm looking at the pump, the dials, pumping gas, and I can hear like footsteps in the puddles because it was raining so hard. Like, I turn around, and she's across the street, and she's standing on the block where I'm at on the corner, and she's facing me, and she's staring at me. So I'm staring at her, and she's staring at me, and I turn back around, and I start pumping gas, and then I hear again like her feet. I turn around and she's standing in the middle of the parking lot now of the convenience store. The convenience store was closed because it was so early in the morning, so I was just pumping gas. But now she's standing in the parking lot. So I'm like, fuck this. I put the pump thing back. I close the gas thing cover, get my Tahoe, lock the door, turn it on. I'm getting ready to leave. I look through the rearview mirror and she's standing right behind my Tahoe, looking through the back window. And I hurried up. I pull out of because I honestly thought I was going to get robbed. That's the first thing that popped into my head. She's setting me up. I'm going to get robbed. So I'm hurrying up, and I was so nervous that I went the wrong way. I took a right headed towards the cemetery instead of taking a left where I would be headed towards my work. So I ended up going the long way. 12 hours later, the day goes by. I work at my job. I'm done. I go home. And it was a Friday, it was a weekend, and I'm getting ready. My ex calls me up, and she's like, I'm going to drop off the kids. She was going to drop off the kids because they were going to stay the weekend with me. And so I'm like, okay. So she calls me when she's there. Now, my house in Walla Walla, it's got 3 doors that go outside. One of them is the front door, which goes out into the main street. I live down the main street. There's another door that leads to the backyard, and there's another door that leads to the alley. That's the door where I would always go out because that's where I park the cars. So she calls me up. I go out, and I see them, and they're not looking at me. Like I look to walk towards the car, and they're not looking at me. Like my ex is, his mom is looking behind me. And now where my house is at, there was a fish pond that I had, and the kids are leaned over in their seats. I still remember Mia was still in a booster seat, and they're leaned over looking out the window, but they're not looking at me. I'm just standing there. So I turn my head, and standing next to my pond, I'm not kidding, the exact same girl, 12 hours later, several blocks away from the gas station, she's standing in my yard next to my pond, staring at my ex and the kids. She doesn't even acknowledge me. You remember this?
Yeah.
Doesn't even acknowledge me. She walks right by me and walks straight to the car. And my ex is looking up at her, and she's looking down at my ex, and the kids are in the back like all scared because they don't know what's going on. And I remember my ex is like, I'm just going to keep calling her my ex. My ex looks up at her and she's like, hi. Like, and she wouldn't say nothing. And she's like, can I help you with something? Didn't say nothing. She turned around, came walking towards me, doesn't even acknowledge me. She passes me and tries to walk into my house. So I get in front of her. I tell her to stop. She's not going into my house. And she looks at me like kind of like upset. And she's like, is Mike home? I'm like, there's no Mike that lives here. And she's like, is Tom home? I'm like, there's no Tom that lives here. So she gets mad and she yells at me like, why are you lying to me? And I turn around and I look at his mom and the kids. They're in the back like freaking out. And their mom is looking at me like, what the hell kind of shit did you get yourself into this time? And and at this point, I'm like, okay. I take my phone out. I call 911. They asked for my address. That's the first thing they did. And I told them what was going on. You know, there's this girl. She looks very confused. She's young. She's in my yard. I don't know what to do. It's not really an emergency. I just don't know what to do. I can't get rid of her. The 911 dispatcher knew exactly who I was talking about. She told me that this young girl had her. She lives with her dad, and her dad takes care of her. And she had somehow left the house that morning, and they had been looking for her all over town. And they had received several 911 calls from concerned citizens, so they knew exactly who I was talking about. By this point, the girl's across. She crossed the alley into my neighbor's. She's standing in the middle of the yard, and she's facing me, just staring at me. And next thing I know, there's like a police SUV that pulls in. You remember when they pulled in? Mm-hmm. A police SUV pulls in. Then there's like a little pickup truck, like the little tiny ones that were popular in the 80s and early 90s. And this guy gets out, skinny older guy with a big beard. He gets out. They don't even acknowledge me. The police, the guy they don't acknowledge me. I told the 911 dispatcher they're here. She said okay. She hung up. The older man grabbed the girl, put her in his truck, and then he briefly spoke to the police officer, and they took off. Didn't acknowledge me, nothing. Didn't ask me any questions, nothing. So, years later, I still don't know what happened because they never told me. Years later, I think we're not living in Walla Walla anymore. I think we're living like in Richmond or Kennewick. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've moved around so much in this area. We're in the Tri-Cities area, and I'm talking about it, and then I realized when the girl was trying to get into my house, she was like, "Where's Mike?" And I was like, "There's no Mike that lives here." Then she's like, "Where's Tom?" I was like, "There's no Tom that lives here." Growing up, my closest friends were Mike and Tom. How creepy is that? So looking back, that was pretty creepy. So what were you going to say, Max? Max actually wrote a paper about it at his school. Because you tell us.
Yeah, like 4 or 5 years ago, when I was in 8th grade, I had to write an assignment on a crazy experience that I had. And basically, like, people were writing, like, the stereotypical crazy experience, blah, blah, blah. And so I write about that experience. Because I was, like, 8 or 9. So it, like, really scared me. And I turned in, and my teacher called me to his desk, and he's kind of, like, asking me, like, is this true? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, that's certainly a crazy experience. I'm like, yeah. Okay.
So what did you get? What was your grade on the assignment?
I got like an A or something.
You got an A? Yes. So there you go. That was my my crazy experience. You know, to this day, I don't think your mom believes that girl ended up by my house by accident. Anyway, that was my crazy experience. Like, what were the odds? I just randomly ran into her at a gas station, and then 12 hours later, she's in my yard. So there you go. I always wonder what happened to that girl. Don't have a clue. Hopefully she's doing okay.